Hey guys, this is Barlow. So I made a Valkenhayn matchup tier list essentially, and I want to talk about it a little bit because I know I haven't. I mean, I've done this before and I've voiced my thoughts, but I want to go into more detail on some of them. Just to be clear, I want to explain what the tiers mean really quick, and then I'll talk about what exactly makes a matchup hard or easier for Valkenhayn and the three broad areas of a matchup, which is oversimplifying, but I think gets the point across. So I'm going to be talking about offense, defense, and neutral, and then the tiers. So when it comes to tiers, first of all, I don't really view matchups in terms of numbers because, to be quite honest, I don't think it's descriptive enough, and I think it provides like an expectation of what a character should or should not do in terms of results in a specific matchup. And to me, that kind of felt wrong and was ignoring the human element. So I'm just going to talk about them really quick. So for starters, I have three different even tiers, and these are all the same level. They're just different ways of describing the way that these matchups vary, just in terms of style. So like stable, this is kind of a broad term, and I know people use it a lot. Stable and unstable basically mean how explosive or straightforward a matchup is, or I guess consistent, I should say. Like a really good example, which I'll get into later, is that I would consider Tager to be an unstable matchup because even though Valkenhayn does have an advantage in a lot of situations, it's very explosive. And I feel like describing the matchup as a sort of unstable ordeal versus just throwing it an even and calling it a day gives more description of that. And again, I'll talk about what that means a bit later. Whereas stable, you might see like less explosiveness and just more interactions overall, but those interactions are, for lack of a better term, I guess, less swingy. I don't know, like less explosive is really the way I'd put it. I think Casino Night Zone is the same as unstable. It's just I put it in its own separate tier to be funny, I guess. And when I say light advantage and light disadvantage, I actually mean light. Like, it's not a lot, but enough for me to notice it. And then advantage and disadvantage are what I would say are, yeah, there's clearly something here that I find very challenging, or that I find to be particularly easy compared to other matchups. And I feel like I should clarify as well, I am not a top-level BlazBlue player. In fact, I think in the grand scheme of things, like internationally, I'm probably just mid-level. And I do know I have a lot of varying opinions compared to other Valkenhayn players. Now, for Valkenhayn matchups, this is kind of interesting. So basically, the things that can make a matchup hard for Valkenhayn, I'll go through each of the three areas I mentioned earlier. On offense, this means on offense like as Valkenhayn. On offense, if they have a lot of ways to contest through rock, paper, scissors interactions, like reversals or just high like reward reads, or if they have really good answers to stopping certain gaps or setups in a block string. Like for instance, Ragna, when he is defending, when I'm fighting against Ragna, I do have to worry about his ability to 6A in between Wolf 5C, Wolf Jump A on instant block, on top of, having to deal with DPs and all of that good stuff. And plus, if he overdrives through something that's unsafe, I'm going to take a lot of damage because he's more explosive. That's kind of what I mean, is how well I can keep my offense and open up the opposing character. And then on defense, it's just kind of how well Valkenhayn deals with their offense in general, what kind of answers he has, and what the nature of those answers are in terms of commitment. I'm actually of the belief that Valkenhayn does not have bad defensive options. I think he has a solid group of situational defensive tools, which I'll talk about later. And then neutral. Neutral's kind of all about the wolf meter. So matchups that are harder in neutral tend to cause Valkenhayn to spend a lot more wolf meter, which means he has less to work with for offense, or he has to give up neutral, play more human neutral, which is easier in some matchups. Like for instance, it's very, very easy to play neutral as human against a character like Ragna, but it's much, much harder to keep winning neutral against a character like Izanami. And again, I'll get into that later. That said, I'm not going to go through every matchup on this list. I'm just going to go through the ones that I want to talk about, or the ones that I suspect will be controversial. Because again, I know that I have very differing opinions. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the comments and responses to this, which I know are going to have some emotions. And I'm going to do a follow-up, which will address some of the more common answers and questions. So I'm going to skip all of advantage, or I guess just to give a brief overview, all three of these characters don't have great defensive options against Valkenhayn, and even though in the case of Nu and Lambda it does make neutral a little bit harder, it's not really harder enough to the point where I feel like I need to spend a lot of wolf meter and can't like keep these characters in the blender once I get in. No, in fact, I feel that like I can play pretty comfortably in human form against these characters, not necessarily to win neutral, but there's not a lot of immediate threat there. Now light advantage. So I'm gonna, starting from this side, I'm gonna skip over Makoto and Terumi. I'm gonna start at Carl. And I think Valk has a light advantage over Carl just because in neutral, when it comes to playing around Doll, Carl doesn't really have a lot to make us spend wolf meter, whereas with Valkenhayn, he has excellent tools, I think, for poking the Doll. 5B, Wolf 5C are both super nice. Wolf 5C can actually hit both the Doll and Carl simultaneously, which is super helpful for when he's trying to cover the Doll at certain spaces. Carl can't push the advantage super hard when Valk is low wolf meter, so I feel like the slower pace of the matchup makes it easier to regain wolf meter. Now, obviously, this is a very polarizing matchup just because Valk can't really do a lot about Carl's offense, and Carl can't do a lot about Valk offense. Carl has pretty much no real reversal, and his kind of quote-unquote fake ones, like, backdash and the roll out of the corner, Valk can cover really easily without too much commitment. So that's really polarizing, but I'd put it in light advantage because I think that Valkenhayn has a slightly stronger neutral against Carl, and again, that mostly just comes down to the ability to regen wolf meter. Arakune. So Arakune is interesting. This is actually one of my most played matchups in the game. Guys know I have Tomato Blast, aka Spooky Blast, in my scene, so I play this matchup all the time. Obviously, it's very polarizing if Arakune gets Curse, but I don't think Valkenhayn has to spend too much wolf meter to navigate around this character. Arakune doesn't really have the air-to-airs to deal with Valkenhayn's Wolf Jump A, and that obviously helps a lot. And his defensive options exist, and they're a little high reward, but they're not really that hard to the point. They're not good enough to really make the offense against him difficult, just occasionally scary in some situations. Arakune can RPS here and there, and when he does win it, the reward is very big, but it's very rare that those situations come up and have a big effect on him. And I just feel like Valkenhayn maneuvers in neutral, even if you don't consider the wolf meter. I don't think this matchup is awful in human form. Having a hop dash is actually kind of nice, just because it's really easy to not get trapped by the spiders too much. And a 6A is a really good call out for A 6A is a very good call out for some of the instant air dash pressure resets. And that's really nice to have as well. So jump 4B, you don't have to worry about too much because you know that you'll be able to cover it with 6A and generally win most of the time. Wolf 5B will clash with it occasionally. But yeah, I don't think Arakune is more floaty neutral is really a problem versus Valk. It doesn't force him to spend a lot more wolf meter, and he doesn't have the kind of air-to-airs that say a character with similar movement like maybe Izioe does. Kokonoe, another one of my most played matchups. The reason why I'm going into this one is because I don't think there's a ton of footage of this one. You would think at first glance Kokonoe does well just because she can put so much on the screen, but honestly, Valkenhayn can maneuver the screen so well that her screen pollution doesn't really scare him a lot, and not to mention she doesn't, outside of Jump A, she doesn't really have super good neutral tools against him. You do kind of have to watch out for 3C, but since Wolf Dash and Resin both go over it, it's basically a non-issue. Kokonoe can make Valk spend a little more wolf meter in neutral, but it does require a heavy graviton usage, and so she is tied to a slightly more limited resource than Valkenhayn is. The one thing I will say, though, is that if Valkenhayn gets low in wolf meter, neutral's pretty much over. I can't run out of wolf in this matchup at all. And again, I think this character's pretty much dead once I get her in the corner. Her only real reversal is Wake Up Super Ball, and she can kind of do some RPS with a decent backdash and Wake Up, Wake Up 6C, which has low invuln. But Super Ball can be covered pretty safely. It's not a huge threat. Her counter assault's not very hard to bait. I think Valkenhayn just has a light advantage against her, because it's hard for her to run her game plan against him if the Valkenhayn plays properly. Susanoo, this one's obviously in the more polarizing end just because Susanoo hits hard. He has good buttons against Valkenhayn. They're also pretty whiff punishable. Jump A and Jump C are both great tools against Valkenhayn, but I think Susanoo dies once he's in the corner. However, the thing about this matchup is it actually becomes a little scarier later on because once Susanoo gets access to stuff like Sword and Grand Viper, he has much more threatening full screen presence. And of course his damage gets higher, so that makes the matchup a lot harder. And if he gets level 2 spin, it's very suffocating to try to play Wolf in neutral. But he has to meet certain conditions to reach that state, and I've played this matchup billions of times against a strong Susanoo in my scene, and I don't feel like it really goes to that super often. And Susanoo does have a DP, but there's a pretty safe and consistent option select for it, so it's not really a big deal. Although it is a big one, so that can be annoying. Yeah, so then even, 9. 9 to me is just like the quintessential even matchup, because I feel like Valkenhayn gets a lot of distance off of pretty much any mistake she makes. Like, if she whiffs an error normal, if she makes a bad dash, Valkenhayn can always get in there to at least start some kind of offense off it if you're playing well. And 9 doesn't really have the full screen presence without specific spells to, like, cover Valkenhayn, and, like, you know, incentivize him to really spend a lot of wolf meter. This is another case where I think if Valk does run out of wolf meter, it's much easier for her. She doesn't have super great defensive options against him, although they're not terrible. She does have a frame 4 head invuln option with 214B. Actually, Tuxedo Mask, who's the only North American 9 I've fought that has given me like any trouble in this matchup at all, does a good job of showing that option to RPS well. And yeah, I mean, I think it's just a pretty straightforward matchup. S. So S is interesting. This is, from my understanding, JP Valks despise this matchup. In fact, a lot of them seem to think this is his worst matchup. And I can kind of see why, in the sense that I think neutral against S is very, very challenging. Valkenhayn has a hard time dealing with jump D. 6B is a strong button from her, although it can be whiff punished, and her jump B just covers an absurd amount of airspace for a lot of active frames. But even so, I think that the only place she has a real advantage here is in neutral. I think S has a complete neutral advantage, absolutely, and when she gets meter, it even gets harder because of the Fireball super, so you have to play at certain ranges differently. But when it comes to offense and defense, I feel like they're pretty evenly matched, maybe like slight Valk favor. She does have a pretty nice DP, but it can be easily OS'd with the Wolf Jump A backdash OS. And she doesn't really have like another option on Wake Up that makes doing that scary. And I think that Valk does really well against her on defense. There's a lot of things that are really nice. Like, for instance, 6A can deal with any like of her main pressure resets. You can use it to like blow up all these buttons like jump C, jump B can actually get tagged by 6A. If she tries to do like 2D to reset pressure, you can even 6A that. You can actually get like a really nice combo off that too. And she doesn't have a ton of great options for catching 4D escape if Valk can IB correctly. And on top of that, she has a lot of gaps in her average pressure. Like, you know, going into Fireball cancels, Valk can very easily Sturm Wolf those. He actually has one of the best supers for calling that out. So, like, I don't think S is really all that scary when she's in on him. I mean, yeah, if she has Crests and meter, you do have to worry about instant jump C, you know, play around all that. But I don't really think her offense is that scary, and she doesn't really hit all that hard either compared to other matchups. It's not really as scary to get hit by S, in my opinion. So yeah, while I think the neutral is hard, I don't think offense and defense against her are particularly challenging. I'm gonna skip the next 3, go to the unstable tier. Azrael. So Azrael's a really interesting case because I think when Valk knocks down this character, Az has some RPS options, but they're not hard for Valkenhayn to cover at all. So he has to commit there when he's defending all the time. His defensive options against Valkenhayn are not good. Valkenhayn kind of has pretty average defensive options against Azrael. I don't know. There's not really anything notable there. In neutral, I would definitely say Valk has an advantage. The only thing that kind of makes it scary is that obviously Gustav Buster covers the ground game very well, so because that space is threatened so much, there's a lot of space that you typically don't want to be in. And additionally, when Valk is low in wolf meter, Azrael honestly gets to start his pressure mad easy, and that's scary because this matchup is just so explosive. I definitely think Azrael, like, I mean, it's Azrael. He can kill Valkenhayn pretty quickly once he gets momentum. You know, he hits hard. I mean, that's true for any character, but the damage difference for Valkenhayn can be a big matchup factor solely because, you know, Valkenhayn doesn't hit very hard, so you end up giving people a lot of chances to get out of pressure and hit you hard. There's definitely matchups like this one where if you fuck up, you're really going to pay the price even if you do have an advantage. But I don't want to make it sound like it's like completely impossible for Valkenhayn or anything. I think this is pretty even, although I do think Valkenhayn has a significant damage on offense. Significant advantage, excuse me. Tager and Kagura, I'm gonna kind of lump these two together because they're not exactly the same, but they share similar qualities. For Tager, it kind of comes down to just how much damage Tager can do. Tager has a lot of health. Valkenhayn does not hit hard. The situation where I have Tager knocked down and he has resources to do reversals that'll end my life and, backdash and do all these RPSs, those situations really, are scary, and they're kind of inevitable just because Tager has so much health and you build so much meter from getting hit in this game. Obviously, Valkenhayn dominates Tager neutral, really. He's suffocated and can't move a lot, in the early stages of the game, and Valk doesn't even have to spend that much Wolf meter. But that does change once he gets Spark Bolt, because, a Wolf can't block, so you do have to be careful about that, and that it can get very scary there for sure. And Wolf when magnetized is a very interesting case, but we'll get into that another time. Kagura is sort of interesting, because Kagura, I don't know, I feel like Valk has a pretty clean advantage against Kagura in most interactions in neutral. I still go back and forth on how this matchup is. I feel like it might be slightly Valk favor, but I'm not really sure anymore. There's things like Kagura Jump C that doesn't trade favorably with Wolf 5B like a lot of other jump-ins do. Even though it is a risk, he can cover a lot of ground space quickly to make it harder for Valk to move in those spaces. He can RPS on defense very well. B Flash Kick can actually be really scary, and you'll find me hard baiting that one a lot just because it gives him a combo and there's not a lot of Wolf string gaps he can't do it through. Pretty much any gap where if Kagura knows you're going to 6D, he can hit you with B Flash Kick, and that one's not even, really possible to OS to my knowledge, although admittedly I haven't labbed that one as much. Yeah, so Kagura just hits hard. He's slow and is very easy to whiff punish, but he does have a few tools that are a little scary to deal with. And just because Kagura is so explosive, those few interactions he does win can be enough. And again, because Valkenhayn doesn't do that much damage, those situations are more likely to come up. You definitely can be a little scary to fight that character. Platinum? There's really not much to this one. She has pretty good buttons. She's decently mobile. She has some pretty nice air buttons and mid-range pokes for dealing with Wolf. Some of the items are pretty suffocating in neutral, Cat Hammer is great against Valkenhayn. The Halo's great against Valkenhayn. So the matchup really changes between items, but Platinum with the right items and just, the right play can really make it hard for Valkenhayn to win neutral. That said, she's not very scary once you knock her down in the corner, and I wouldn't say her offense is particularly scary. It's Platinum without the specific conditions, setups, having the instant overheads and all that. That's all pretty much the same. But there are certainly items and game states where Platinum can be a scarier character, so I'd put that matchup as even, but on the unstable side. Hakumen, let's jump right to him. This is one of my most played matchups, again. I put this under Casino Night Zone because this matchup comes down to RPS. That's really all it is. Valkenhayn has a pretty clean advantage in neutral, but when Hakumen starts getting more stocks, which again is inevitably going to happen, the offense situations are obviously scary as hell. Risk-reward for going for mix-ups is not even in my favor a lot of the time. But the neutral does get a little bit scarier just because, he has Enma to call out a lot of stuff, and, the air invulnerability on that's really nice. You always have to be on the lookout for Yanagi just because Wolf can't block, and that's not an easy thing to react to, so he can cover that ground space. He does have some annoying ground pokes, although they're not particularly hard to deal with, although Jump 2C is a little hard to anti-air, so... But that said, this matchup comes all down to the offense-defense, and when it comes down to that, this is total dice roll city. It just comes to being able to beat the other player. I do very well against Hakumen in tournament historically, but it's never easy. Even if, the player is just playing really aggressive and taking a lot of risks, it's not easy to mitigate that like you can in other matchups with Valk. Now, light disadvantage. I'm going to talk about Naoto and Izuyoi. I'm not going to talk about Mai or Izanami. I'm going to do that later. And then disadvantage, I think I'm just going to talk about Lychee, because I think Lychee has the kind of kit that makes it easy to explain what makes a matchup hard for Valk sometimes. So a lot of people might be surprised to see Naoto. I've played this matchup a lot with Rowan. Naoto's very interesting because he doesn't really have the best buttons all the time, but he can cover the ground space very well. He is mobile, and he can put some pretty nasty hitboxes out there for Wolf, and he hits hard. So it's just kind of like I don't think Naoto is particularly oppressive in one area of the game against Valkenhayn, but I think that every situation favors him just a little bit. He has some great ways to catch Valk, doing 4D escape mid-screen. He hits hard. There's not really a lot of easy 6A gaps or anything like that. Naoto has some pretty good defensive options because I can cover DP with some things like Instant Jump C. There's a tight OS for DP and Wake Up that you can do if they're emergency teching, but I don't think it works off other tech timings. But really, I think it comes down to just Naoto is like slightly favored risk-reward in pretty much most areas of the game. Izuyoi. I've gone back and forth on this one. Before anyone asks, yes, I have played against this character a shit ton. Yes, I've played in tournament against SKD. I know a decent amount about this matchup, and the only thing that makes me feel like Izuyoi might have a light advantage over Valkenhayn is that when she's in gain art mode, she can move freely without resource, and Valkenhayn, is tied to Wolf Meter. That's really it. He does well against her defensive options. Like, you don't have to worry about DP because it's so easy to cover an OS safely in a lot of strings. For Riser, obviously is like a big hitbox that sometimes I need to worry about, so I do need to be on the lookout for that. I actually think Valk does a good job against normal mode neutral because her anti-airs and her ground pokes are such high commit, and you don't actually have to spend a lot of Wolf Meter to evade her from getting stuck, so you can force her to pop her overdrive or really commit to try to get them, and I think that's really nice against her. And also, Izuyoi she hits hard conditionally, but her average damage is not crazy high, so it's not too scary to deal with her a lot of the time. Now, Lychee. So, Lychee sort of just has an advantage in all three areas, offense, defense, and neutral. She has great defensive options against Valkenhayn. A lot of them are safe. She RPSs really well. She does very high stable damage, so, there's always a damage disparity there. The interactions she wins are more meaningful. And the other thing about Lychee is, like, there are a few situations where the RPS on defense does favor her, which wouldn't normally be a big deal, because, like, for example, versus Hakumen, I can disengage those situations a lot and just play neutral again. Against Lychee, it's a little bit harder because you just spend a lot of Wolf Meter evading the staff and trying to catch her as well. I've played this matchup a shit ton. Uri was my practice partner for, like, almost all of 2018 and like half of 2019. So I'm really comfortable with it. And then on offense, Valk just doesn't really have super strong answers. There's a lot of gaps he can Sturmwolf out of, and I think he has good overdrive punishes against her. But Lychee is still just a very scary in the corner. It's not impossible for Valk, although I would say that this to me feels like his most challenging matchup. A little bit of confirmation bias because I think out of the three listed at the bottom, that's probably the one I've played the most. I know Japanese Valks also don't really like playing it. But mostly it just comes down to Wolf Meter because it's like you do all this work to evade the staff and get a hit on Lychee, and you do maybe like 1.6 to 1.8 damage. You take her to the corner, and then you've got a dice roll if she has resources, and it's like, well, I can disengage and play neutral again, but then I'm low on Wolf Meter, so I need to go to human form to regen. And like Lychee versus human form Valk is like Lychee just wins that very decisively. It's very hard to evade her just because, Valk's natural movement in human form is so limited. So yeah, that's all I have for now. I'm just going to upload this. I'm probably not even going to make a thumbnail for it, just to share my thoughts. So thank you guys for listening and for watching. I'll make a follow-up response video to any questions or comments. If I think that they're dumb, I won't respond to them, but yeah. Let me know what you guys think. I'm always happy to answer questions. Peace.